Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another news and rumor video to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at some signings from our past couple of days, some injury updates, some pieces of news involving coaches and players signing overseas, and we got some trade rumors involving the Ducks, the Kings, the New York Rangers, and a couple of other teams. With all of the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey Channel. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to leave a comment. Also, don't forget to stay tuned for our June 27th. June 28th, and July 1st live stream, so don't forget to stay tuned for that. But in today's video, we got another news and rumor video to discuss. We got a couple of signs to talk about, we got some injury updates, some pieces of news, and some trade rumors. So as usual, we're going to start off with a couple of signings. Only two signings from our past couple of days. Neither of them are overly big, but the Edmonton Oilers have signed former 5th round pick in the 2021 draft of the Buffalo Sabres. That's center left wing prospect Viljami Marjala to a 2-year ELC with an AAV of $873,000. Mirtle, I think, was one of those players whose signing rights expired on June 1st, so he was a UFA, so the Oilers scoop him up. Mirtle looks like a decent prospect, had 8 goals and 52 points in 54 games over in Liga, looks like a solid prospect there, and it's someone who I think the Oilers could eventually turn into maybe like a bottom 6 player. I don't think it'll happen next year, or probably anywhere in the near future, but I definitely do think Mirtle at some point could be a decent pickup there for the Oilers. So very interesting note there. Well, the Tampa Bay Lightning has signed 22-year-old RFA forward Jack Finley, who's a center/right winger. He gets a 3-year contract extension with AV league minimum, so very similar to the contract extension that Max Strozier just got. Finley this year had no points in one game with the Tampa Bay Lightning, while he had 14 goals and 28 points in 39 AHL games. Finley looks like a pretty good prospect. I think eventually could be a solid bottom 6 guy, maybe in the next year or two, and it's definitely still a call-up option. So very interesting note there. But another 3-year league minimum extension is handed out by the Tampa Bay Lightning, so very interesting note there. But those are only two signings from our past couple days, as Marjala has signed an ELC in Edmonton, and Tampa has given out an extension to Finley, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to a couple of injury updates. So not too many injury updates here to talk about in today's video. First, with the Edmonton Oilers, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who was listed as questionable for Game 3 with an undisclosed injury for the Edmonton Oilers, was able to play in Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals. That's a big boost there, as if the Oilers had lost Nugent-Hopkins, that would have been a horrible blow with Hyman already out. So it's good to see Nugent-Hopkins was playing, although he was limited in Game 3. While AJ Greer, who missed Games 1 and 2 of the Stanley Cup Final after leaving Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Final with an undisclosed injury, returned to game action for Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. So that's a huge boost there for the Panthers. The Panthers, I think I saw a stat here, can't confirm nor deny this, but I thought I saw a stat on Twitter saying that the Panthers going into Game 3 were 10-2 with AJ Greer in the lineup in the playoffs. So if that's true, Greer's been a big force of that bottom 6 with the Panthers, and getting him back is going to be a huge boost for Florida's bottom 6. So very interesting note there with Nugent-Hopkins, who was ruled as questionable to play for Game 3, was able to go for Game 3. And then AJ Greer, who had missed the first few games of the Stanley Cup Final, was able to get back into game action in Game 3. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to a couple of pieces of news to talk about. So first, with players going over and signing overseas, Kuhlman, who was a former depth player in the Boston Bruins organization, the Seattle Kraken organization, and a couple of other teams, has signed overseas in the SHL. So very interesting note there. Kuhlman probably was going to be an AHLer at this point in time in his career, so he goes overseas and he'll see if he will wind up going back to the NHL in a couple of years' time. Well, Igor Sokolov, who was a former high pick of the Ottawa Senators, was dealt this past offseason to Utah in exchange for Jan Jenik. His contract was expiring with the Utah Mammoth, and apparently it sounds like he's going to be heading overseas to the KHL. No guarantees, he hasn't signed a contract yet, but it's definitely looking like Utah will lose Sokolov to the KHL, so no updates there yet, but it does sound like the KHL has some interest in bringing in Sokolov, so very interesting note there. But Kuhlman and Sokolov seem to be heading overseas and could play in the SHL and KHL. Next, going over to some more hardware that was won, we got an announcement, I think it was back over on Monday, that the Jack Adams Award had been announced, and the Jack Adams Award winner this year is Spencer Carbery. Carbery led a Capitals team who was the second wildcard team in the postseason last year, was one of the teams who a lot of people were expecting to be a bubble team this year, led them to the Eastern Conference title, led them past the Montreal Canadiens in round one. So Carbery had a very fantastic year for the Washington Capitals as their head coach, and it was good enough to earn him the Jack Adams Award. The other two finalists were Scott O'Neill and Martin St. Louis. St. Louis led a Canadiens team who was supposed to miss the playoffs this year to a second wildcard position final, while Scott O'Neill led the Winnipeg Jets to the President's Trophy, even though they were ousted in round two. So very interesting note there. I think all three of those coaches and probably a couple of other coaches deserve the Jack Adams, but Carbery, after leading the Capitals to the Eastern Conference title and past Montreal in round one, he earns himself the Jack Adams, and Washington's coach is the new Jack Adams winner. So very interesting note there. When it comes to Maxim Shebanov, we talked about him a couple of videos ago, I think it was, saying that he's a top KHL prospect and one of the guys who a lot of NHL teams have some varying interest in. According to a couple of recent reports, Shebanov could be going to the Philadelphia Flyers. Knows that the Flyers have some major interest and seem to be the front runner right now for bringing Shebanov from the KHL. So nothing's finalized yet. There's no pen to paper at this point, but it definitely seems like it's leaning towards Shebanov going to the Flyers, which would be a very good forward add there for the Philadelphia Flyers for this upcoming season. So very interesting note there. We also saw, I think it was over on Monday or it might have been Tuesday morning, that TJ Oshie has officially retired from the NHL. So this comes as no surprise. Oshie missed the entirety of last year due to an injury, and it was basically a career-ending injury. So he was never going to return from that. So he's officially called it quits. Oshie was a long-time Capital. I think he played over in St. Louis for a couple of years too. So he's been on a couple of teams. I think he's played over 500 games. I think it's close to 1,000, if not over 1,000. So Oshie had a very long career. Was mostly a middle six forward over the past couple of years in Washington before he suffered his injury. So interesting note there. Oshie, I think, was part of that Washington Capitals team that went to the Cup. So very interesting note there. But Oshie, who's been with the Caps for the last number of seasons, has officially called a career after his injury. So very interesting note there. Well, for the New York Islanders, they have made two assistant head coaching hirings, as they have hired Bufner, who was an assistant in the Detroit organization, and Bennett, who was a power play coach in the Colorado Avalanche organization, as new assistants. We talked about in one of our recent videos that the New York Islanders had fired a couple of assistants and that they were going to be looking for some new guys, and they have found it in Bufner and Bennett. So very interesting note there. But the New York Islanders have hired Bufner and Bennett as assistants, and we'll have to wait and see if these are really good hires for Patrick Waugh and his staff. So very interesting note there. But those are all the updates from our past couple of days. As Kuhlman is signing over in the SHL, Sokolov could be signing over in the KHL. Carbery has won the Jack Adams in Washington. Shebanov could be heading to the Philadelphia Flyers organization. Oshie has retired from the NHL as a member of the Washington Capitals, and the New York Islanders have hired Bufner and Bennett as assistant coaches in their organization. So very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So going over to a couple of interesting trade rumors from our past couple of days. So the first one is actually a extension rumors. According to Elliotte Friedman, he mentioned on one of his recent podcasts that the Edmonton Oilers and Trent Frederic are closing in on an extension, even though they are still trying to work to bring the cup back to Canada with the Edmonton Oilers right now. Frederic, who is a pending UFA, has worked decently. Like, he's definitely injured right now, so I wouldn't be one bit surprised if it came out after the Stanley Cup final that he had some sort of a major injury that forced him to play hampered, because he did miss the end of the regular season due to an injury. But Frederic, if he can get back up to speed, I think could be a very solid middle six forward, sort of hard to play against, that tough physicality type presence. It seems like the Oilers really liked what he's brought, even though he's been injured in the postseason. So it sounds like Frederic and the Oilers are probably going to come to terms on an extension. My guess would be Frederic would want like a 2 to 4 year deal at around $3 million, maybe a little bit more. I've seen some people say maybe it could be similar to Tampa Bay Lightning for Nick Paul's extension, which was a 6-year deal at 3.25. So maybe it's a little bit more longer term, but a little bit lower on the AAV. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But Freeman does say that the Oilers and Trent Frederic are working towards an extension, and that it definitely seems like Trent Frederic will wind up signing at some point with the Edmonton Oilers. So very interesting note there. When it comes to Charlie Coyle, we talked about this in our last video about how Frank Saravalli mentioned that Coyle is a potential trade chip. Given the fact that Avalanche needs some cap space, defense, and Coyle's role might be one that the Avalanche could do without. Well, according to Kyperos, he also agrees that Charlie Coyle is a very likely trade candidate for the Avalanche. Coyle's making $5.25 million. Now, with Nelson signing that $7.5 million extension, the Avalanche don't have the money to pay a $5 million third-line center. Like I said in my off-season preview video for the Avalanche, they need to move on from Coyle to give them some free cap space so they can either go out in free agency, get like a cheaper end third-line center, or maybe have a guy like Jack Drury play as a third-line center. But I don't think they can have the luxury of paying a $5 million third-line center. So it definitely seems like Coyle's on the trade block. He's going to be interesting value of his deal. So for any team who needs some center help, maybe they could ask the Avalanche to retain a little bit of money. I think it might be a smart move there for other teams to try and target Charlie Coyle, especially with the very low amount of top-end centers in this year's free agency group. And I definitely think Coyle on the right team could still be, even though he'd be a lower-end guy, I think it could be a decent second-line center. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But after being dealt at the trade deadline to Colorado, it seems like Coyle could very well be dealt again at some point this offseason, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to another thing Nick Kyperos was mentioning, and that is involving Vegas defenseman Nick Hague. We talked about Hague quite a bit over the past week and a half, ever since it mentioned that Hague is probably going to be traded by Vegas. According to Kyperos, he says that the Montreal Canadiens and Pittsburgh Penguins are two teams who have some massive interest in Nick Hague. We talked about Philadelphia in one of our recent videos. Montreal and Pittsburgh also makes some sense. The Montreal Canadiens are trying to rework their blue line. They have a lot of younger players, but no real solid players with thighs and experience. They have Alex Carey, they have Mike Matheson, but Matheson's into the final year of his deal, and Carey is more of a third pair of defensemen. So with that in mind, it might make some very good sense for the Montreal Canadiens to go after a guy like Nick Hague. For Pittsburgh, it sounds like they're sort of trying to go through a retool or a rebuild. So they're trying to get younger. We've already heard Kyle Dubas say multiple times he wants younger, established NHL players. Hague is that sort of a guy. I think he's like 25 or 26 years old. I think he'd work really well on that blue line, especially if the Penguins were to consider moving on from a guy like Erik Karlsson or Ryan Graves. I think acquiring a guy like Hague would be a very smart move there from the Pittsburgh Penguins. And like I said, I think the Vegas Golden Knights are moving Hague to free up cap space. So I don't think they're going to be taking on anyone in return. So if the Canadiens or the Penguins are looking to try and acquire them, I'd be looking at picks and prospects, probably go back Vegas's way. The Canadiens have an abundance of picks and some really good prospects. So I think the Canadiens could definitely get that sort of a deal done. The Penguins definitely have less picks and prospects than the Montreal Canadiens do, but I think they could have the assets needed to sort of make that deal work. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But according to Nick Kyperos, Montreal and Pittsburgh have some serious interest in Nick Hague, and we'll have to wait and see if either of those two teams acquire Nick Hague. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the New York Rangers. According to Mirtle of The Athletic, he was talking about the New York Rangers recently. He says that the Rangers are shopping and looking to move K'Andre Miller and potentially even Carson Soucy. Now, Miller has been a name we've heard over the past year-ish, ever since last year in the offseason. Miller, last year at the start of the season, didn't have a great start to the season, which led a lot of people to believe that the Rangers could move on from him. He's arbitration eligible. A lot of people do think that the Rangers don't want to pay the money that Miller's going to be owed this year, and especially if it hits arbitration, it could get costly. So that's led a lot of people to think that Miller could be moved. I think it makes some sense for a lot of teams to try and acquire K'Andre Miller. He's a top four left shot defenseman. I'm not sure if he'll ever be a top pair guy, but he's a very solid second line guy. He won't put you up a whole bunch of points, but he's a very good defensive guy. He's an RFA, so you're gonna have to sign him to a new extension. But if there are a couple of teams out there who could sign him to like a 5, maybe 6-year deal, like $5 to $6 million, I think that'll be a smart move there for a lot of teams. I've heard Los Angeles be linked to him. Personally, I wonder about Detroit and Calgary as potential landing spots for K'Andre Miller. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But Mirtle does say that Miller's potentially on the trade block for the Rangers. On top of that, he also mentions Carson Soucy as a potential trade candidate. Now, Soucy was acquired at the trade deadline by the New York Rangers from the Vancouver Canucks. According to a couple of recent reports I've seen, Soucy might be able to be traded for like a 3rd or 4th round pick. Similar value to what the New York Rangers moved, which was a 3rd round pick to Vancouver for him. So Soucy's entering the final year of his deal. He's got a $3 million cap hit. Very solid 4 or 5 defensemen who I think could work very well on a lot of team 3rd pairs, or on some weaker teams maybe as a 2nd pair of defensemen. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But the Rangers seem to be very intent on making some massive moves to shake up their blue line. They moved Trouba in season. It seems like they're gearing up to move Miller and Soucy, and that defensive core that went to the Eastern Conference Final just 2 years ago could look completely different at the start of next season. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly, going over to more Mitch Marner news. According to a couple of recent reports I've seen, one from Jeff Merrick and one from Mirtle of The Athletic, they were both talking and said that Anaheim and Los Angeles could both be gearing up to make massive offers for Mitch Marner. According to both of them, they could be in the Leon Draisaitl market. So we know that teams like Dallas, Vegas, Nashville, Florida, if they wanted to sign Marner, it'll be a little bit easier for them with a tax break, but LA, Anaheim have really high taxes. So with that in mind, it seems like both those guys could be gearing up for massive offers for Marner. We've talked about Los Angeles. I personally see Marner being a top fit in Los Angeles. I think LA and Vegas are probably two of the top fits, in my opinion, for Mitch Marner. So I can see why LA would have some major interest. Anaheim's a team who's really wanting to make the playoffs next year. They have a ton of cap space. They can make some things work. So I could definitely see the Ducks try and make that sort of deal. And I don't think Marner's worth that much. I think on a team in a tax state, he should be making at the very most like $13, maybe $12.5 million. Like, I do not think Marner's in the stratosphere of Leon Draisaitl, but given the fact of how many teams want him and how good of a regular season player Marner is, I can see why there would be some teams out there who would offer him Leon Draisaitl type money. So no guarantees that either the Ducks or the Kings will offer him something of like 6 to 7 year deal, like $14 million. Like there's no guarantees by any means. But it definitely does sound like Anaheim and LA are going to be major players for Mitch Marner this offseason, and we're going to have to wait and see if they do wind up giving Marner a $14 million AAV extension. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Those are all the updates. Let your guys' thoughts. Do you think Anaheim or LA could offer Draisaitl type contract to Marner? Do you see Miller or Soucy being moved by the New York Rangers? Could Coyle be dealt by the Colorado Avalanche? Are Marjala and Pittsburgh very likely landing spots for Hague? And could the Oilers and Frederic work on a contract extension? Definitely thoughts on all of that, plus the news updates, the injury updates, and the two signings from the past couple of days. Definitely thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. We're going to like this video, and for letting me subscribe below. Thank you for all your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. It really helps out the channel. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to leave a comment. Don't forget to stay tuned for our June 27th, June 28th, and July 1st live streams. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll leave a link to that down in the description below. Cannot wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.